Welcome, listeners, to episode 28 of the Running Guy podcast, where I aim to provide informative content and interviews with elite athletes and health professionals around the world, like in today's episode, where I'm chatting with an extremely distinguished guest whose life, both personally and professionally, has been dedicated in the pursuit of improved athletic performance within the field of sports science and all that surrounds it. Very honoured to have this gentleman on my show. Welcome to the Running Guy podcast, Professor Dick Telford.
Thank you very much, Aston. It's a pleasure to be here. A pleasure to talk to you about running.
No, look, thank you so much, Dick, for agreeing to be a guest on the show, mate. You've been such a huge innovator and contributor in the field of sports science, distance running, and kids' health. So I sort of believe the information that and all the stories that you've gathered over all those years in research. We could pretty much do a podcast series, but we'll see what we can get out today. There's just so much information we could chat about. Now, I'm going to mention the AFL Grand Final. The Tigers picked up another flag, and I'm going to use that segue for a reason, because in your early days growing up in Melbourne down there. So I just want to head back to those days, and if you can chat about your own sporting pursuits in Aussie rules and cricket. I know you were attending Northcote High School there, so Melbourne boy. And then we can chat about why you chose to head down the pathway into studying sports science, please.
Well, I guess, Aston, we've got a lot of years to talk about now.
So we do, mate. We can lose a few, but I just love the listeners to hear about your background first.
That's fine. I remember my footy years, as though they were yesterday, which, it's a hell of a lot of decades ago now. But in those days, I grew up right in the centre of Melbourne, and strangely enough, my father had just come back from the war and had a scholarship to go to Melbourne University. So we lived close to Melbourne University in the suburb called Parkville. But one of the reasons we lived in Parkville was it was one of the cheapest places to live in the whole of Victoria. In those days, in the 50s, basically, this is the 1950s, the inner city suburbs, no one wanted to live there. In fact, there was sort of a slummy area around there, and over the road there's a place called Camp Pell. It's now called it's now houses the Children's Hospital, and it's a beautiful big park now, but it was called Camp Pell, and that was full of huts where they were repatriating soldiers that had come back and had nowhere to live. And my father in those days used to get me going. He used to when I was a 6 or 7 year old, get me out for a bit of a run, but I wasn't allowed to run anywhere near that park because there were dogs that would bite you and everything like that. So it was different in those days. But I was going to mention that all I thought about in the early days was football and cricket, because in Melbourne there were no other sports around beside football and cricket. We knew about the Olympic Games because that came in 1956, but football and cricket was our religion. It was everything we thought about, everything I thought about. I went to school, but I was still thinking about football and cricket. And I had a terrific upbringing in sport based on those two sports. And I used to actually get a tram and go across to the MCG and watch the Sheffield Shield cricket. I watched a bit of Test cricket there. I can remember some vivid games there. And I'd go and watch Collingwood. I'd stand on a soapbox that my dad used to bring across. We'd catch the bus down to Victoria Park, where Collingwood ground was, and I'd be in the outer, jammed up against everybody because there were no seats there. We could only get standing room, and it'd be packed out. I don't know, probably 25, 30,000 people in those days in the old Collingwood ground, and that was where I was introduced to sport, Aston, and that's where it all started.
I believe you played a fair amount of games in the VFA, and in 1968 you actually awarded the JJ Liston Trophy for the best and fairest, so you were playing at a reasonable level there.
Yeah, it was funny because when I left school, I was sort of tossing up between a few sports, and I must admit I was starting to get a bit keen on baseball as well to match up with my cricket. But Collingwood asked me to come down and play, and I played with Collingwood seconds for a while. Actually won their third best and fairest, I think the second year I was down there in the seconds. But I couldn't quite break into the firsts at Collingwood. I was a bit small, and as a young kid. To cut a long story short, I gave footy away for a little while, but decided to build up all my strength, put on about 3/4 of a stone of just muscle, perhaps a bit more than that, like 5 or 6 kilograms, doing weights and things like that. And then I was asked to go down to Preston Footy Club in the VFA because a mate next door was playing with them on the half-forward flank. And there's a fellow called Alan Joyce down there who coached, he ended up coaching Hawthorn and successful coach in Western Australia. He was coaching Preston. And through him, I was asked to go down. Had a game in the seconds there, and couldn't stop getting kicks in the seconds in that particular game. They put me in the first the next week, and that particular year I missed the first 2 or 3 games, I think, because I wasn't absolutely intending to play. But had a pretty good year. We won the flag, and I won the Liston Trophy for the best and fairest in the competition, and I won Preston's best and fairest, and I didn't look back from there, and we won the flag again the following year. So I had a terrific couple of 2 or 3 years at Preston Footy Club.
Yeah, yeah. And were you playing cricket at this time as well, or was that another chapter?
No, the funny part about it is that I was also asked to coach the Preston Cricket Club. There was an ex-Test cricketer called Jack Potter. In fact, he was one of my heroes, a fantastic cricketer. I used to watch him play at the MCG. And Jack Potter was coaching Preston Cricket Club, but then decided that he wanted to give it away. I think he went across to South Australia to live. And he rang me up and said, "Look, Dick, I'm giving away the coaching. I've talked to the committee and they'd be pretty happy if you took on the coaching job at Preston." I said, "Oh, well, that does sound interesting, Jack, and I'll give it a bit of thought." And I took up the job. And so for a couple of years there, I was actually coaching the Preston Football Club and Preston Cricket Club simultaneously. And I was just talking to a chap about this the other day. I think I've done something fairly unique there, that in coaching those two teams simultaneously, when we were in the finals of the cricket in that year, and I was doing pre-season training for the football club at the same time at the end of the year, I actually went out to cricket practice in my cricket gear, took my football gear out into the middle of the ground, and once cricket practice had finished, I changed into my footy gear at the end, and as the runners, as the footballers all came out for their pre-season football training on the ground. So I've actually coached the two teams within the 1 hour on the one ground.
Okay. So what age were you at that time?
I would have been probably 26, 27.
Okay. Yep.
I wasn't. I was a keen sportsman. In a way, I didn't apply myself as a lot of other people would have. I was more keen on a whole lot of different things at the time. I was then getting very, very keen on studying biochemistry and physiology at Melbourne University after I did a phys ed diploma. And I was studying pretty hard at that particular time. So I had a lot of other interests at that. And also I was just married and a little kid and the first child there. So I had a hell of a lot of interests at that particular time. And when I look back, I probably had too many interests, but it seemed to work out okay.
Yeah. And did you come from a sporting family, or were your parents suggesting you get involved in sport, or was that something that you did yourself? Were your siblings involved in it, or?
The father, I think, was he as I understand, I never really knew exactly how well he played football, but he played down at the place called Apollo Bay in Colac in the Western Districts, which is where I spent a little bit of time early in my life on a farm there. And he played and went to Colac High School. And apparently he was a good player, but at the age of 17 and a half, he was off to the war. Okay. And I think that interrupted his career, but it seemed to rub off on me because he was just so keen about Collingwood. And of course, I became keen about Collingwood. And he took me to the games, and run it. In those days, we'd run out in the ground with a footy, and he'd come out with me and kick the ball, and there'd be kids everywhere. You're not allowed to do it nowadays, but we'd run out. Then I'd go home and out the back and play around with the footy for an hour and a half or two before I had to come in for dinner, and the same with cricket. We'd just knock around, but I never ever played a single game of football or cricket until I went to high school, because the school I went to was a little college rural practicing school right in the middle of Melbourne University. It's not there anymore, but I only had 30 kids in my school, in that section of my school. So that's 5 kids in each grade. And we never had enough for a team, so I never knew what it was like to play in a game against another school or against any sort of a game until I got to high school, and I seemed to pick it up pretty quickly there, and I just loved it.
Yeah, yeah. And how far did you, what sort of level did you get to in cricket? And were you a specialist batsman or bowler or?
Yeah, I used to bat. I wasn't a great cricketer, but I learned to understand the game pretty well through my studies in physical education, then going on and in biomechanics and looking and physiology and looking at the sport. I got to understand it, and I soon realised that I hadn't, even though I had some very good coaches at Melbourne University. Frank Tyson was one. He played, one of the greatest fast bowlers ever for England. Another guy called George Tribe, who was a bowler, a left-arm spinning bowler. He, for Australia, he was a terrific bowler. So I had great coaches, but they were both bowlers. And I just realised that I'd never, ever had any coaching myself as to how to hit a cricket ball, except playing with a stump and a golf ball in my garage with my mate next door, which we used to play for hours. So I had a good eye, but didn't have the right technique. And it wasn't until I started coaching that I realised that my technique was flawed. But it didn't stop me playing a few district games, which is for Melbourne University and Fitzroy, which is the level below Shield level. But I was probably a bit lucky just because I had a good eye. I just didn't have a good technique. When I went to Preston and coached there, even though I didn't score a lot of runs, they were difficult to score because the wickets weren't all that good, and the grass was always a bit long. And if you got 30 or 40, it was a damn good scores. So I was pretty happy to play reasonably well there when I was coaching, and we won the flag there as well as the football in the same year when I was coaching the cricket, same year as or a year after I was playing for Preston in the footy, where we won the flag there. So it turned out all right in the end, but I was never a great cricketer.
What was your decision to get involved in the sports science? Like when you were a kid, what was the interest in that? It's just the fact that you just loved sport, loved moving, loved exercise, loved understanding.
Yeah, well, first of all, I did science at school,
Right.
and I probably could have got into most degrees at Melbourne University, but I chose phys ed because I was just wanted to do phys ed, and I just loved the idea of studying the way people played sport, the way people moved, all those sorts of things. I didn't have any great aspirations to get into the medical area at that stage. Though later on, I thought about it, but didn't after I'd done a degree there. And that was just a fascination with sport all around. I think that just drew me into a diploma. It wasn't even a degree at that particular time in 1963 when I started Melbourne University. But as it turned out, I reckon I would have spent 18 years at Melbourne University on and off with part-time work and some full-time study and teaching at the same time, then lecturing at an institute part-time as well. So I reckon I would have spent about 18 years altogether at Melbourne University. Before just getting an honours degree and then a master's degree, and then a PhD in the medical school in the Department of Physiology.
Okay. So you're obviously doing a lot of running, with cricket and footy. But when did your actual, transition begin into, let's call it, competitive running?
One of the reasons that I got a lot of kicks on the football field is, again, I don't think I had a lot of ability. My eye-hand coordination wasn't bad, but I wasn't a great kick. I wasn't a great mark. I don't think I moved exceptionally well, but I did have a lot of I had a bit of speed endurance. I could keep running and run reasonably quickly when I had to, but keep running all day. And in those particular days, when I was playing at Preston, the grounds were a bit smaller, and they decided, at one stage to reduce the number of players on the ground from 18 to 16, so there were no wings, and allowed me to play a running game in the middle. Now, also in those days, what we weren't allowed to do, if you went off the ground, say you were injured or sick or whatever happened, if you were off the ground, you weren't allowed on again. So you couldn't. There were no interchanges. We just had in those days a 17th and 18th man, 16 the team, and if you're off, you stayed off. So in other words, I was able to just keep running from wing to wing, down into the half forward line, half back line, just keep running all day, and sooner or later, no matter how good the player was on me, I'd find myself by myself a lot of the time. And therefore, my half-back flankers, and I had some very good ones, would be able to just pick me out by myself on a wing running, and I'd be able to bounce the ball a couple of times and kick it down into the forward line with no one on me. So I was a bit of a cheat that way. I got most of my kicks, and I used to get a lot of kicks, a lot of handballs certainly the kicks by myself, having been fed by some good players on the half-back line, which that led me into, as soon as I retired from footy, I thought, well, gee, I'd like to do some running. So I thought, well, the obvious thing to do now is to try and run a marathon. And that was my next aim, to run a marathon. And so I did a bit of training and ran a marathon.
Yeah, yeah. What time did you kick over the first marathon?
The first marathon, I trained for about 10 weeks and did exactly what I know you shouldn't do. I heard runners were running 100 miles a week. So the first week, I think I ran about 30 miles, second week 40, third week 50,
Yeah.
then 60, then 70, got it up to 100 miles a week. And I thought, oh, this is not too bad. And I wasn't getting injured. Not that I'd ever heard of runners getting injured before at that stage. A little bit different now. So I went down to Frankston, then out of Melbourne, 26 miles away from the GPO, started the race. And I thought, well, I reckon I could run about 3 hours. So I was running along at about 3 hour pace, got to about 3 miles or 4 miles before the GPO, and just completely blew up. I got the cramps, everything. I didn't. I knew that people ran out of glycogen, and I knew that you had to do a lot more training than I'd do. I just thought I'd get through it, but I didn't. But strangely enough, just as I got all these cramps, and I can still remember this, a lady on the side of the road, it was at near St Kilda Road down there, running up to St Kilda, I would have had 2 or 3 miles to go, I reckon, probably a couple of miles to go, gave me a bag of jelly beans. And she said, well, would you like some jelly beans? I said, oh, yeah, I'd like some jelly beans. And here I was, I could hardly walk. Within about a minute to 2 minutes, the jelly beans kicked right in, and I was able to jog in. I didn't run in 3 hours. I think I ran it in 3 hours 12 or something like that in my first marathon. And I was pretty happy to get in. It was just I can always remember that. Everybody does, I suppose. Remember their first marathon. It was the slowest marathon I ever ran. Everyone after that was a bit quicker than the one before. And but it was probably, it would be the most memorable marathon.
Good you experienced hitting the wall in your first marathon. That's what it's all about. So what age were you then?
Oh, well then, that was, I would have been, 32, 33.
Okay, yeah.
33, yeah.
I see here, you're running pretty well over the 1,500 metre distance in the mid-80s. You picked up the M40s at the Nationals for the 1,500 in 85, and then equal third actually at the World Veterans in 87. So, you ran a marathon, but you also had a lot of speed there on the track as well, and we'll sort of run through your PBs in a second. But yeah, so were you sort of focusing on any distance, or is it like a progression that you were going through, like a lot of runners do, or?
Or you've now opened up another area that allows me to boast a little bit.
Okay.
It's sort of boasting a little bit in the same way that, I was able to change at Preston Footy Ground to say that I've done something that nobody else has done, and
Sure.
it's going to be unlikely they're going to be. And here's another one, and it sort of fits in with answering your question, Aston. Every race that I've run from, I only did middle distance races from 800 to 1500 to 3K to 5K, 10K, then to half marathon and marathon. Every race that I've run, the very last race that I ever ran was my personal best, the fastest I ever ran.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
I asked a lot of people about that one.
Yeah.
I've never come across anyone that's gone close to their last race ever being their personal best in every single race they've ever run,
Yeah.
every single event, let alone one.
Yeah. Did you purposely go out to do that, or is it just the way it happened, or yeah?
Well, not purposely, but there's a flaw in my character.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the same thing when I played golf. When I get to a certain level, and I think I've trained as well as I possibly can, and I'm not likely to get any better, I'll have a go at something else. Now, that happened with running for me, because the first race that I ever did, after I left school, I ran a few little races at school. I did win a couple of mile races and cross-country races and things like that, but I never took that seriously. But my first race that I trained for was the marathon. That coincided too with me developing a lifelong, friendship with Robert De Castella, being his physiologist and nutritionist for a long time. Now, then when I ran the marathon and got as fast as I possibly could in the marathon, I had a few other people, and maybe you might want to talk about this later, but I had a few people ask me to coach them. I hadn't even considered coaching running while I was a physiologist at the Institute of Sport, but I thought, if I'm going to coach runners and they're running 5Ks and 1500s and 800, I'd better run these damn things myself to find out what it's all about. So from the marathon, when I'd run a few marathons, and I gradually got my time down. So as I mentioned, the last marathon I ran was the fastest. Then I ran some, at that stage I'd run a couple of half marathons as well. Then I went to 5K, ran some 5Ks. Then I went to 1500 metres and 800 metres and ran those as well. As the years went by, this is between 35 to 43 or so. So by the time I got to 43 and 40, 43, 42, 43, 44, I was running the fastest I'd ever run in 800 and 1500. And that's when I won the national 1500 and got third in the world, the Veterans Championship, which happened to be in Melbourne. In that particular race, which was the last race, I can tell you that was the last race I ever ran, was that 1500.
Okay. Yep.
The last race I ever ran. And that was my PB in the 1500. So I probably could have run it. But so it's in answering your question about was it purposeful that I did that? Well, in a way it was, because I wanted to find out what these shorter distances were all about and what it was like to really get lactic and hurt and have to try and get, that last 100 metres where, everything's sort of starting to tie up. I wanted to feel that. It just so happened that I ran the marathons and the half marathons and the longer distance stuff before that, and then had to change my training, which was a really good experience for me to do that. Change my training so that as I was getting older, between 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, I had to improve my training so that as I got older, I got quicker. And all I was doing is sort of recapturing a little bit of the speed that I might have had on the footy field.
Yeah, no, you're doing it in reverse order, and obviously, the learnings that you would have got from that to pass on to your coaching would have been huge as well. I'll just get the listeners up to those times. So I've got here the 800 metres at 157.6. I've got the 1500 at 357. Now 357. That's moving thick. I don't have a 5 and a 10. I've got your half marathon at 68:30. Whereabouts did you run that?
In the 68, I think I ran that in Alice Springs.
Alice Springs. Wow.
I was over there with one of my mates there at one stage and decided to run a half marathon, and I think we ran a mile. A
Okay.
mile down the street, which I believe I did. I won that mile down the street, the May Mile.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, Day after I ran that half marathon, which not sure I could do anything like that nowadays. That's for sure.
And the marathon 2:27. That's exceptional time. Whereabouts was that?
That would have been 2:27. Would have been Canberra. Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'd
Yeah.
been
Right.
there.
Yeah. You must have been up the top five for that time, surely.
I don't know. We had some good runners around.
Yeah.
I don't know about. I might have finished in the top 10,
Mm.
but I never worried about where I finished. I do remember having a bit of a tussle with a couple of other guys on that particular day that I knew, but really it was the times that always interested me. I never consider myself when I'm running in a group, with Australian representatives, obviously younger than me at that stage, but much better runners. I never ever considered myself a really good runner. There's no question about that. I was running with people all the time that were good runners. I just used to love just running faster than I'd run before. I really loved running a PB, and as I've said before, that happened time and time again. And each year I'd get better in the event that I was working for, and that's why when I'm coaching now, I get as much satisfaction in seeing someone get their satisfaction from running a PB as perhaps seeing a top runner that I'm coaching get a medal in Commonwealth Games or in the one Olympic Games that I've had a medalist.
Yep.
I mean, it is a bit different, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
it's, it's
Yep.
the enjoyment of running really is part of the enjoyment of coaching.
Sure. Sure. And let's start moving into that side, but let's head back to the early days of the Australian Institute of Sport (AIS) here, mate. I believe Don Talbot offered you that job, that first sports science position back in the 80s. I guess you were there to help develop, which you did, a world-leading athlete development sports science centre. Pretty successful. Definitely its glory days of the AIS. That must have been pretty exciting.
Oh, it was very exciting, and I got a hell of a shock when Don Talbot was. I was giving a talk I was working with some of the very early work. This would have been I was doing it in the late 70s. I was doing some very early work with an engineer, and we wanted to develop a kayak ergometer that was to measure some kayakers. I was doing a little work at Melbourne University, and a place called Preston Institute is now went to be called Phillip Institute, then RMIT, part of RMIT. Anyway, I was doing some work there, and I was giving a talk on how we could measure the fitness of kayak canoers very effectively using this new ergometer that we developed with my engineer mate from Repco Research out in Dandenong in Melbourne. And this chap right up the back must be a lot of people in that lecture now as I think about it, because it was pretty dark, and he asked me a few curly questions. I thought, well, a little bit aggressively as well. And, I answered the questions, and then the same person, I recognised his voice, came up and saw me after I'd finished the lecture. And he said, and I sort of thought I'd recognised the chap. And he said, "Oh, my name's Don Talbot. I'm from Canberra at the moment, and we've advertised a position in sports science, to head up sports science and to develop a staff in sports medicine at the Institute of Sport." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I read that advertisement." He said, "Well," and I said, "Well," I said, "Oh, who did you appoint?" He said, "Well, we didn't appoint anybody. We had 10 people, but we didn't appoint anyone. We weren't happy with them." And right on the spot, he said, "If you want the job, you've got it." I
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
believe it.
Yeah.
He just said that to me straight off.
Yeah.
I'd met him for 10 seconds.
Wow. You must have answered those questions really well.
Well, I don't think I did, as it turned out. But, somehow he'd found that I'd played a bit of sport. I was interested in sport. I'd done some science,
Mm.
I worked on measuring athletes. And I think he just came down to just, somehow they'd arranged, or his group had arranged to offer me the job on the spot.
Mm.
And he gave me 24 hours, typical Don Talbot, to think about it. putting the pressure on me. I went to my boss over at RMIT, as it is now, and he said, look, you've got to take it. So I took it for a year, a 1 year stint. But as it turned out, everything turned out well, and I'm still in Canberra, and that's a long time ago now, 1981.
I sort of I remember as a kid seeing your face pop up on telly when you guys were put together that cereal called Kellogg's Sustain. That's probably the first time that I saw you. Now, was that sort of in an attempt to sort of, I guess, get a better quality breakfast cereal in front of kids? Get them away from the high sugary type cereals? Was it also there
Well,
to help?
as it turned out, it
Mm,
gave us the opportunity to do that. A chap from Kellogg's asked to meet me. Well, he wasn't from Kellogg's, but he was a marketing man working alongside Kellogg's. And he asked to meet me. He said, well, what do you think about this cereal and that cereal? I said, well, yeah, they're okay. You think about it. And I said, well, you take wheat and you take this and you cook the hell out of it, and you've got a crispy cereal. You're never going to get much, are you, when you got a cereal like that? All right, so you can add some more vitamins, you add some minerals, and you can do those sort of things artificially. But when you're cooking things to a crisp, you can't expect to get too much out of a cereal. He said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, this is what we could do. You could have some of that because that's what people like to eat, but you could put some other stuff that's not cooked in it, and you could adjust the amount of sugar and the amount of salt and so on, so you could make it a bit healthier but still make it taste all right. So he said, would you like to design something? So I spent a couple of hours on it, sent him something, which he went back to his people at Kellogg's, and they probably fixed up a few things that I hadn't considered, and we ended up with that cereal called Sustain.
mm,
And the reason that was done was that they set up a deal with the Institute of Sport directly with them, that they would put a certain amount of money. I think it was 2 cents per packet in those days, two cents per packet, which wasn't much, but was only about $1.40 or 50 a packet, I think, when it came out. And that went directly towards scholarships. We weren't allowed to accept money to do those things in those particular days as consultants, but it went straight into scholarships at the Institute, and I was pretty happy with that. It also gave us an opportunity, as it turned out, through the commercials that they wanted to do, to let people know what the Institute of Sport was about. And I think that was probably the best part of it all, to be honest. People got to know what was going on in Canberra at the Institute of Sport in biomechanics, and particularly we had a terrific staff. One of the best things I ever did at the Institute was to develop a terrific staff, firstly in the medical side and the physiotherapy side. We had fantastic people. Then in biomechanics, in psychology, in physiology. When I look back, I must admit I did a pretty good job in selecting the right sort of people that they stood the test of time. And in the end, I didn't end up doing anywhere near as much as what they did, and we got some terrific results.
yeah, definitely. You gave Deke a job there in the early days, and Deke eventually went on to become the director there for 1995. Now, as you mentioned, you were Deke's sports physiologist and nutritionist, working alongside Deke's coach, Pat Clohessy, or Clo. So you guys obviously very successful there, that trio. Deke obviously went on to be a brilliant athlete. You had a lot of strong runners back in those days. I think everyone wanted to be part of the action. Even some overseas runners coming in and joining in over the years. Did you sort of realise those days when you're developing, Deke's career and all the other distance runners, there's something special going on, or were you just so heavily involved in it all, just trying to produce that quality in research and coaching?
I always thought there was something special going on at the Institute of Sport. Yeah, a hell of a challenge. I think I always forget to look this up, but I think the year before I went to the Institute of Sport at Montreal, I think we won 3 or 4 medals. I don't think we got a gold medal, but I think we won 2 or 3 or 4 medals. Let's say it was 4, I think it was. By the time I left the Institute, and things had flourished. When I say things had flourished, we'd stimulated the states to develop their own institutes of sport, which I thought was one of the best things we ever did. We developed networks of sports science people, the physios, and the sports medical practitioners all blossomed in the way they were working with coaches. My staff always knew that our bosses, really, the people that really called the tune, were the coaches, so we were working for them. We had to find out things that allowed them to coach better, and we developed terrific relationships with the athletes. So by the time that I took on, actually, this is when Pat Clohessy left, and I learned a lot from Pat Clohessy as a coach. He's been a fantastic coach over the years. But when Pat Clohessy decided to leave the Institute of Sport, I think it was about 97 or something like that, I thought, well, it'd be a nice idea for me to just see what it's like to be a professional coach for a few years. I took that on. Now, at that stage, when I left physiology there at the Institute of Sport, I think we won 54 medals at the Olympics. So it went from 4 to 54 between 81 and 96. So that's a fantastic leap in world status in terms of sport, particularly Olympic sports, and that was brought about by the development in Canberra, but also in the States, and the relationships that coaches had with sports science people and sports medicine people all around, facilitating that coaching experience. No question about that. So I thought, it was a very special time all the way through. And as you just mentioned, it was all started from the first person I employed in the lab, so to speak, was this young Robert De Castella. And why did I appoint him? Well, why wouldn't I appoint someone that just had a biophysics degree at the Swinburne Institute of Technology down in Melbourne, and was a young runner that everybody was saying could be fantastic. So he was going to be able to talk to athletes. He had the skills to help me set up what we needed to do in the lab. Two of us in the lab there together, with another woman called Wendy Kupke, who had a biochemistry background, but also was our receptionist. So with three of us there, we're running the show for the first few months with 8 sports, and it was a very, very exciting time. Not that we knew exactly what we were doing at all, but we had to learn the hard way, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. Mate, let's talk about some of the athletes that you've coached. The great Lisa Martin, now Ondieki, as you mentioned, I believe, the only runner to pick up a medal at the Olympics. So she was only 13 seconds off the gold there over in Seoul, running a 2:25.53. And she picked up the gold and the comms at Edinburgh and Auckland. So, tell us about coaching Lisa.
Yeah, well, Lisa, she's the only marathon medalist we've had.
Okay.
That's true. Yeah, the only marathon medalist that Australia has produced, and we've in the Olympics.
Yep.
And we've had some fantastic, we've had world champions, haven't we? In Stella and those sort of Derek Clayton world record holders. So, but to win a medal in the Olympics, not easy. Not easy when you've got to be at your best at the right time, produce on the day, and it's easier said than done for athletes, as we all know. With Lisa, I'd only coached 2 athletes before Lisa rang me up from the US and asked if she was to come back to Australia, would I coach her? And that was interesting because the first athlete that I coached was a girl called Carolyn Swallow, and I only coached her because she lost a scholarship, and she wanted to stay in Canberra, and she just didn't know what to do, and she was very upset. So I decided to coach her. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing because I was so busy with the physiology at that stage that I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. But because she was so upset, and I'd had a good relationship with her as a physiologist, I decided to coach her. As it turned out, things turned around for her. She ran really well and became an Olympian and ran an Australian record in the 10K within a year and a half. So I was pretty happy with that. And then another chap came along who asked me to coach him as well because he'd been he'd had a problem, a real problem that his wife had been killed in an accident, and that was Andrew Lloyd. And at that stage, Andrew Lloyd, who you would know became gold medalist in the 5K in Auckland Commonwealth Games, and I was coaching two people, Andrew Lloyd and Carolyn Swallow, and that's when Lisa Ondiki, or her name was Lisa Martin then, I got a call, and it surprised the hell out of me, to be honest, because I'd only met her once, and it happened to be in Edinburgh during the Commonwealth Games, probably a couple of years before that, and briefly met her. And I got a real surprise when she rang and said, if she came to Canberra, would I coach her? So that was how that started, that career with coaching, Aston.
Michael Shelley, very successful at the Com Games, silver and then 2 golds. Again, if you could just tell us about, obviously that was via correspondence because Michael's up on the Gold Coast there, but that was again another nice successful coaching partnership there with an athlete.
Yes, I was just with Michael the other day. He just retired last year, earlier this year or last year. But basically, Michael, when I took on a little bit of full-time coaching at the Institute of Sport, following physiology, just to see what that was like after Paclo Hesse left, Michael was one of my runners at my scholarship runners. So this is when he was age 17. He was recommended by his coach up at the Gold Coast and came down as a potential steeplechase runner. But I soon realised, even though he had an unusual sort of a technique where his running stride wasn't as long as what one might expect for a top runner, and he didn't look as fluent, that he had some speed. And rather than just concentrate on steeplechase, it fitted in with my program better to see how fast he could run a 1500. And he ran, and he came from 348 down to 339 as a 1500 metre runner, which is pretty good. However, he developed an injury in doing a program in the gym where he did something a little bit different for a few weeks and developed an injury that stopped him running. It stopped him right in his tracks. It was the injury in the pelvis, and after that, he lacked confidence in being able to run fast. So I said, "All right, Michael," and he agreed. And in fact, he probably suggested it, that we work more towards in some of the longer distance running, which he never ever thought that he would do. And that's where the marathon career actually started, where he did some 10Ks. He just got under 28 minutes for a 10K, one of only about 10 or 12 people that I think have done it in Australia. And basically, we went from there to the marathon. Never looked back in his career, because for him to win those 3 medals in 3 consecutive Commonwealth Games, with the last 2 being gold, just shows what sort of a competitor he was, being able to run well at the right time and punch above his weight, because he always beat runners that had much faster personal best times than him.
When you're coaching these athletes, do you actually see, like, as far as their personality or their training habits, or just their rituals that they sort of go through mentally, is there anything you can see that's very common amongst these top athletes? I mean, you can say obviously they work hard and they're dedicated, but is there something that you can pick up on that this person's going to be something special?
Well, I think all of the, it's not just the top runners that have got that, but the runners who can get the best out of themselves, and just some runners who get the best out of themselves turn out to be top runners, and others that don't turn out to be top runners, but there's not a lot of difference in the characteristics between anyone that gets the best out of themselves. And it's that intrinsic, or that self-motivation. I don't think, when I was coaching footy and coaching cricket, you got a different mentality, or particularly with football. All the footballers I was coaching were being paid. They were professionals, sure, but they all had other jobs. But there was a lot of motivation had to be sort of instilled in those players. You sort of have to stir them up and get them to play as a team, and it's a contact sport and all those sorts of things. In those days, it was a bit probably not as quick and not as skillful, but it was just as rough, or even rougher in those days, because when we were playing, we would have one television camera there if it was a televised game, one umpire, and you couldn't see what was happening behind the play. And a lot of things happened behind the play in those days that, be considered assault now, but that was part of the game. But the one thing with all of those, answering that question, it's that motivation, that self-motivation. You can tell when runners are going to be really good, that they're driven. They're driven to do their very, very best themselves. And it's driven not by money or those, it's not by fame. It's just they're driven to get the very best out of something they love to do, and that's consistent with all the runners that I coach now and in the previous, since the 84, 85 when I started. So basically, it hasn't changed at all. And you know which runners are going to get the best out of themselves, and others that, well, they like to run, but it's not the be all end all, and they'll enjoy it, but that's about it.
As a coach, how do you best try to manage load? Because a lot of runners just want to run as much as they can all the time. If they're tired, fatigued, a little bit of a niggle coming on, they'll still want to go out and run. How do you sort of, navigate that conversation with the athlete to let them know that, heading out for that run may not necessarily be of any benefit, and just trying to manage your load? And that goes from the recreational run all the way up to the elite. It's all about how much is enough, and does this run tomorrow actually going to be beneficial? Is it going to create some sort of, training stimulus that's going to make me a better runner? Because that's always a tricky one to navigate, that one, isn't it?
It is, yeah. See, over the years, we've spent a lot of time with team sports like rowing and the kayakers and the swimmers and soccer players and all, as to try and find out, is there a way where you can really carefully measure training load? Not so much measure the training load, because you can measure that easily enough, but to measure how an athlete is coping with that training load, and whether they can do a little bit more or whatever. Because we know that the more that someone trains, and absorbs that training, the better they're going to be. But the trick is, the more is not always better, because the more can take you over the top, as you well know, so that you no longer are adapting, you are just trying to survive. And by trying to survive, you can actually lose fitness. It'd be like being in the middle of a desert without food and water. You're doing a hell of a lot of physical activity day after day after day, but your fitness and your health is just going downhill. So that can happen to a lesser degree, of course, in athletes and runners. But over the years, as a physiologist, as well as being a coach, it is just personal communication that I found to be the best indicator. Personal communication regularly. When I've got an athlete, and I'm just thinking of one that I've got right at the moment, that is a very good athlete who has had a history of injury, then I like to talk to that athlete about how they feel and how they've recovered every single day. Now, I know that's time consuming and I can't do it to everybody, but I can talk to all of my athletes individually and encourage them to talk to me or bring something up when I see them at training on, the opportunity to see it training every day anyway, because we do gym on Monday. We have training as a group on Tuesday. We do gym on Wednesday. We have training as a group on Thursday. I see some of them on Friday. We train on Saturday morning and I see them on Sunday so I see them nearly every day. So I've got plenty of opportunity to communicate with those athletes. And if we do it wrong, it's because I haven't communicated properly with them, or they haven't done the same with me, or told me about something they should have told me about. And I've got a very strong principle that when something comes up, we nip it in the bud. We don't muck around. Might be Lisa Waitman down in Melbourne, for example. She's very, very good communicator. She's a medalist in the Commonwealth Games. She's produced her best at the right time. She's nearly 42 years old now, just run a PB in a half marathon, the 10K, so she's going pretty damn well. But as soon as she gets anything that is worth, she's not sure about, she'll call me. I'll call her back if she misses me, if I'm in the middle of work or whatever, and she's working as well. 9 times out of 10, right, no running today, no running tomorrow, Lisa. Let's have a talk about it. See your physio, see your doctor, give me the feedback, and then we'll reconsider what's going on next. And she's been really good that way, and that's why she's been able to run consistently over the last, how long have I been coaching her? Must be 14 or 15 years as well.
Because a lot of runners, if they feel that niggle and it's not getting any better, they'll very hard for them to stop running. Obviously it would make sense, even if jumping on the bike or jumping in the pool, doing some laps, do something to keep the fitness up. But so you're not afraid to tell an athlete to just stop if it hurts. It only makes sense to stop, and you get it assessed. And because a lot of runners will just continue to just head out for an easy 30 minutes of an afternoon, even though that they're sore, and just continue to aggravate that, which I always find a little bit strange. I call it like a running addiction. A lot of runners have. They've just got to run regardless. So again, that's a tricky one for a lot of people to navigate, to not be afraid that if they have 1 or 2 days off, even though they've run every day for the last 300, that they're going to lose all their fitness overnight, which a lot of people fear.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, it's just a matter of, we just talk in terms of common sense, that sometimes you're going to become fitter, if you like, more specifically fitter, or in terms of performance, by having a rest, by recovering, because it just allows you to absorb and adapt to the training. As I said before, it'd be like the opposite is, just trying to survive. And sometimes athletes seem to be just wanting to survive. They'll keep soldiering on, whereas just a day or 2 or 3, even a week, where they might do some cross training, as you mentioned before, on the elliptical machine, or on the bike, running in the water, swimming. They can improve their fitness that way, or doing some gym work where they're not aggravating the particular injury they've got, and improve their fitness in other ways while they're getting rid of any of the problems. So it's hard for me to understand why an athlete wouldn't understand that. I think most of my athletes would understand that. It's just a matter of discussing it with them. Yep. But I'm fortunate to have a whole lot of runners in my group right now that do understand it, because they're studying sports science, studying physiotherapy, chiropractic, and all of those disciplines. They really, with those disciplines, they really do understand what they're doing, and I use sports science people, physio, and 1 or 2 chiropractors, and physiotherapy and chiropractic sort of mixing up, sort of got together. In the old days, there was the chiropractors and the physios. Now the techniques are sort of moulded in together, and we've got some very, very good practitioners around Canberra that I rely on with my athletes quite a bit.
Yeah, I always sort of say, I get fit when I'm recovering, when I'm laying in bed, when I'm sleeping. Like when you say you're on the track doing Deeks quarters or whatever you might be, you actually, in a way, you're sort of actually reducing your fitness. You're actually breaking your body down, and you don't actually get the benefit or get fit until you actually allow your body to recover, and that's when you actually get those fitness gains. Not actually during the session, but the recovery after.
Well, it is. It's all about stimulating and stimulating a system, and then allowing that system to adapt, and that's what the human body does. But the human body, again, if you overstimulate a particular area to the extent that it just can't adapt, it's likely to tell you that it can't adapt by saying, well, I'm breaking down, and I just can't go anymore, and an injury or something, an illness occurs, because the immune system is exactly in the same boat. And athletes get sick, athletes get injured if they train too much. That's not training though, that's just trying to survive, and a lot of athletes get mixed up between survival and training.
Yeah. So just having that discipline to listen and react to it. Mate, I remember back to a conversation I had with Reece Edwards. You remember Reece? You trained him for years now. I think he's last time I spoke to him was up north coast in New South Wales. So Reece said when he used to train with you that Dick always likes to have his runners in 10k shape, and that sort of gives them that required fitness that sort of enables them to tweak their training programs to prepare for a shorter, longer distance. But basically, if you're in 10k shape, then you're sort of ready to go. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, and I remember Reece Edwards well. Of course, he trained with us for quite a while down here, then went up to the coast and continued to train by himself. Uh, he's a typical runner that has a really good knowledge of what's going on with his profession and so on. So with Reece, along with the others that I had then, yes, he's right. 10k fitness is fundamental to middle distance running and longer running, because 10k fitness sort of indicates in the physiological terms where this threshold is. You call it aerobic or anaerobic threshold. You can mix those terms up a little bit. In other words, the level at which you can hold for around about 30 minutes or thereabouts of solid running, just holding your homeostasis or the equilibrium. In other words, where your heart rate's steady, your oxygen consumption's fairly steady, your body temperature's fairly steady, you're holding things fairly steady for half an hour at the maximum amount. That's an important state, because that is highly correlated with how fast a runner can actually run a marathon and how fast a runner can run an 800 or a 1500. It's just that when you want to run an 800 or a 1500, you've got to do other training on top of getting that 10k fitness work, and alongside it, when you're running, that's for 800, 1500. For a marathon, you do different training, because you've got to get the energy storage system going, which you don't really need so much for the 800 and the 1500. So that 10k forms the basis for a lot of the work that I do, because when I know what a runner's 10k time is, they're roughly their threshold, that equilibrium state they can hold for 30 minutes. Then I got a pretty good idea of how to plan training around either side of it, and how much they need to do based on that particular measurements. So that's why it's an important characteristic for a runner for me.
Now, you've sort of been involved in preparing a lot of fine distance runners for major champs over the years. Sort of like asking who's your favourite child type thing, this question, but is there sort of one occasion that sort of still brings up the old goosebumps when you think back, like what one of those real fine moments? It could be for the athlete, or it could be for yourself, or it could be both. But yeah, one of those moments you think is one of the big highlights of your career as a coach.
I have answered this. Someone asked me this a while back, and I might have given an answer and then regretted giving the answer. The reason I regret giving the answer is if I pick out something that comes to mind straight away, I think, oh, gee,
Well, give us a couple then, mate.
Well, it's not even giving you a couple. I
Okay.
mean, there are hundreds. There are
Yep.
hundreds of occasions where you think that this is fantastic. This is why you coach, because you see the athlete really enjoying themselves, and when you see the athlete really enjoying themselves and doing something that they've been really trying to do for a long, long time, and finally getting there, that's what coaching's all about. I could go, right from the highest level of performance, from someone like Lisa Ondiki getting our only medal in the marathon and coaching her, through to, and that level through to Michael Shelley winning his gold medals, and Lisa Waitman, and but just to mention those two, for example. What about the other people that I've coached that have won medals? There's 8 or 9 of them in Commonwealth Games medals. That, the Andrew Lloyds and these sorts of people, that when I go back at that particular time, it's just sensational. So it's not really fair. I've mentioned a couple just because they've been right at the top. It's not really fair just to mention them when there are so many others that have won, that I've been involved with medals in the Commonwealth Games. And even I remember some, as a physiologist, working with swimmers that won Olympic medals and broke world records that I've worked with. They're fantastic experiences too. And having been with those swimmers as they walk out and do the job. To me, that's then you can go back to somebody who just gets a PB in the Canberra Times fun run, or a veteran athlete that I coach that has just came second or third in the camp, or even may have won the Canberra Times 10K. That sort of thing, isn't it? That's a really good feeling as well. So it comes all over the place, and there'd be hundreds of experience like that over the years. I would have to say, Aston.
Sure. I'm going to throw another curly question at you too that you'll probably have to.
Well, that was really curly because
Yeah. If you had to give a tip to runners out there, that the most important thing they should be looking at within their training program.
The training itself. Nowadays with nutrition, with the amount of, unless you've got some wild ideas, the nutrition side with us in Canberra, for example, in Australia, where we get food coming from all over the world, plenty of fruit and vegetables and all of the characteristics of general nutrition are within our reach every single day. Nutrition shouldn't be a huge factor in terms of how it might be in a less developed country. So we should be pretty well right there. But nevertheless, athletes have got to know that nutrition is an important characteristic of their training, and that the good quality carbohydrates and fruit and vegetables are very, very important part of training, as is the protein, and are the good fats. No question about that. Now, that's one side. The training itself is the factor that makes the difference in most people. If you can train specifically according to your particular makeup, and you can take two, say, 800-metre runners who might run very fast. Let's say they run, for sake of a time, 1 minute 50 seconds for an 800-metre run. It's not fast by world standards, but it's a very good 800-metre run. You can have those two runners being completely different characteristics that require two different training programs, but still actually have the same PB. Because one might be more inclined to be a faster 400, 800-metre runner. The other one might be an 800, 1,500-metre runner. And therefore, you've got to be able to train those runners differently. So runners themselves have to recognise what their best training program is going to be to get the best out of themselves for the event they want. So I would say that that's an important aspect of the runner. And then finally, with the training, to understand how much you can do while you are actually adapting and improving, and what is too much, and what that optimal level is. And it is an optimal level, not a maximal level of training that we're all looking for. Even for a marathoner, they'll run lots of Ks a week, and marathoners are often running 200 Ks a week. We know that. But another marathoner might not be able to run 200 Ks a week to get the best out of him or herself, whereas 165 might be just about right. And I've had both in both those categories as well.
Great answer, Dick. Mate, let's finishing up chatting about you've been involved improving the physical literacy in children, mate. Pretty big and noteworthy passion of yours for a long time with the development of the Look Project, which is acronym for Lifestyle of Our Kids. So let's talk about that, please, Dick.
Well, I just heard my son, who's got a PhD from the University of Canberra in physiology and physical activity, just told me yesterday that he heard that the Victorian government was going to be putting in a new system. I don't know whether it's come out this morning. I have to have a look. Of improving physical education in schools down there. And if that's the case, I'd be very, very pleased, because we did 2 randomised controlled trials down in Victoria to show the importance of introducing more quality physical education into primary schools by upskilling the classroom teachers to take physical education, because we just haven't got enough physical education specialists in primary schools to take, on average, more than 1 class a week for a primary school child. Now, if what my son told me was true, and I'll have a look later on, that they're introducing more kids in more professional development of classroom teachers through introducing physical education specialists going around primary schools and doing this professional development. That's exactly the program that we did a randomised controlled trial on and provided all the results to the Education Department down in Victoria, and that would be music to my ears. What's also music to my ears is that we're doing exactly that work now in South Australia. South Australia have taken the lead with their Minister of Education, their CEO over there, and the Education Department with ACHPA, the Professional Association of Physical Education, and Flinders University. We've got a program down we're running completely next year, introducing a professional development program which we call the People Approach, the same one as down in Victoria, physical education for physical literacy, a physical education, physical literacy approach, where if we get this right in Australia, we'll be able to improve the quality of life of those kids for the rest of their lifetime. And that information comes from a lot of work that's been done around the world, but specifically that LOOK project, that Lifestyle of Our Kids project that you mentioned, Aston. And that Lifestyle of Our Kids project has been a very, very important project for us, where we measured 830 kids in Canberra, grade 2. We measured them in grade 4, in grade 6, in their year 10. That was the last time we measured them. They were 16 years old. Next year and the year after, they'll be 24 and 25 years old. These 8-year-olds are now 24, 25 years old. Now, what we've done, we've measured their physical activity, their nutrition, their health in terms of blood measures and heart measures, and brain measures in terms of psychology and their sociology. I had a whole lot of team of people around measuring all these things. And we've been able to show, firstly, how important physical education is in primary schools, and we can't afford to continue to ignore it, as we are doing in Canberra to a certain degree, because we haven't got many specialists in primary schools at all in Canberra. And classroom teachers are so busy that they can't take up the slack. And then what we'll be able to show is how important has physical education and physical activity and nutrition been in 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 16-year-olds, for when people are 25, 35, 45, and even up to 85 later on. So that's why that study is so important. And I'm hoping that the government, particularly the ACT government with Andrew Barr, because we spoke to him recently, will be able to take on this people approach based on the LOOK study that Victoria seems to be taking on now, and Adelaide and South Australia are definitely taking on. So I'd love to see us take it up in the ACT as well.
That's fantastic work, Dick. As an observer, I've got young kids, and you can see that you can see the problem that exists. Kids don't seem to be moving. Well, we know they're not moving as much as they used to. They're not moving as well, I don't feel. And certainly the diet isn't as good, and you can visually see that. So there's certainly work that needs to be done, and what you're doing, and just as you mentioned, hopefully the government take it on board and listen and put changes in, because something needs to happen soon. Something needs to change.
Yeah, well, particularly when we've found by the highest level of research that we can do, that's a randomised controlled trial where we're comparing how kids change against kids that aren't getting, for example, physical education in schools. We've actually proven how important it is, but the most recent study we've done really adds to this, because the most recent study, again, it was directed by Rowan Telford, who lives in Melbourne now, but brought up in Canberra and studied at UC. He, with the team that we've got in Canberra at the University of Canberra now, has just completed a study in Queensland. We were invited to do the study in Queensland that showed exactly the same as we found in the primary schools in 3, 4 and 5-year-old kids in early childcare centres. We've just finished the study. In fact, we're just writing it up. That's what I've got to do today when I finish talking to you, Aston, finish off one of the next papers in this particular project called the Active Early Learning Project, which really shows the extreme importance of introducing a physically active lifestyle in childcare centres, because when we introduced that and compared it with kids that didn't have that in the childcare centres, we found not only improvements in physical activity, but we found improvements in social and psychological aspects as well, how the kids were communicating, not just with their motor skills, but their communication skills as well. And that all sort of fits in with the premise that our mind and our body are developing together. And when the body's not developing as well through a lack of physical activity, the mind doesn't develop as well either. And that's why this physical education in early childcare centres is just as important, probably more important than in primary school, but we can't say more important, but just as important in primary schools, and then in preparing for an active lifestyle through life.
No, it's fantastic work, yeah. And as you know, most people listening and myself and yourself know, exercise, it changes the state of the mind, and many times you go for a run with a lot of chatter in your brain and thinking of things, and then you finish that run and it's all clear and gives you that clarity and you feel so much better. So there's such a good hormonal response when you actually exercise and when you run. So like you said, that link between the body and the mind is so obvious, and it's something that as athletes we know, and even goal setting and having desires and all that comes out of sport. So it's not just a physical side, but it's actually basically enabling you to have a goal to go for and to better improve. And as you know, obviously active kids generally, I'm not too sure, if you looked in these, I mean, you would have known about these studies, but how much is documented that kids are more active, seem to be a little bit clever in school, if I can use that word, because that the body is healthier. And so it's such an important thing in society today.
Precisely. Look, you're probably referring to one of the studies, one of our original Look studies, where we found that even in the ACT, the children who had physical education. And this physical education was developed by a group called the Blue Earth Foundation, who have done a fantastic job producing top-level physical education in schools that don't have it themselves. The kids that had that between grade 3 and 5 improved their NAPLAN scores by 13 points more than the kids that actually spent more time inside without the physical activity, without the physical education. And that links up with what you just said, Aston, that and I mentioned before, that the mind and body develop together. And a lot of reasons, it's not a simple, straight cause there, but people who are more physically active and are involved with physical skills actually are able to, and the children are able to concentrate better in class, and that was shown by the improvement in the NAPLAN scores that we saw, but also by the testimony of the teachers that actually teach these kids to say, yeah, well, these kids are better students because they're doing, or at the same time that they're doing the physical education.
Look, mate, I'm going to wrap that up today, Dick. I'm really looking forward to doing this again soon. Like I mentioned before, there's so much we could talk about. Look, you've been such a huge contributor to Australian sport in general, with all the work you've done in research and in coaching. And I think Australian sport and certainly distance running is a hell of a lot better shape due to all that work that you've done. And I'm glad that you've picked up some awards over the years, Order of Australia, and I even saw you picked up a little Senior Citizen of the Year, and you also have been awarded in the Australian Sporting Hall of Fame. So, man, all that hard work, it's good that has been recognised, and we have a lot to owe to you, Professor Dick Telford, and all the work you're going to continue to do in the future. Like I said, we're a lot better off having people like you around, Dick. So, it's been an honour speaking to you today.
Well, thanks very much, Aston, but don't forget, a lot of this stuff I do because it's I enjoy doing it. It's that's what life's all about, isn't it? And even right now with the research and the running, I'm doing it because I enjoy doing it. So it's a little bit selfish in that way as well. We're all here to enjoy ourselves and get satisfaction out of what we do, and we all have different ways of doing things. And I appreciate having a chat with you and the Running Guide podcast. Well, you're doing a great job. Keep it going.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dick. Yeah, thank you once again. Well, we'll catch up one day, mate. I'll come down and say good day to you.
Yeah, you better do that. Come down to training. Come down to training, have a bit of a run with us. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, I will do that, Dick. All right, thank you again.
All the best. See you later.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for listening again, guys. Appreciate those who made the effort over there at iTunes to give the show some reviews and ratings. Much appreciated, and hopefully that will continue. like and share this episode, and throw in some comments, good or bad, to keep me informed on how it's all going on your side of things. I'd like to receive a bit of support, basically for the price of a Melbourne latte per month over there at Patreon. Got one. Would love to have more than one. Maybe that's my mum. I won't tell you that. But yeah, Patreon support, $5 a month, just to help support the show would be fantastic. Also, there'll be a link in the show notes as well as that for the purchase of the podcast singlets. All right, guys, thank you very much. Cheers. Speak soon. Bye.